Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. I'm always on the lookout for guests and companies that will come on this podcast and simplify how technology is helping businesses and individuals and providing new ways of working and fixing old problems. So when I was researching Zero Trust Microsegmentation, yes, that is how I spend my spare time. It's sad but true. How else am I going to find enough content to provide you with a different podcast every day? But when I was exploring that topic, I ended up on the website of a company called Edgewise Networks, or more specifically, Peter Smith, founder and CEO of Edgewise Networks. And zero trust and microsegmentation are hot topics in the information security landscape at the moment. And I thought everyone listening might be interested to learn more about it. And it's not just me that spends my spare time exploring these topics. Especially considering that research firm Gartner recently listed microsegmentation as a top security priority, second only to better network hygiene. So with all that in mind, I invite you to let me take your ears on a road trip to Massachusetts so we can speak with Peter Smith, founder and CEO of Edgewise Networks, where we're going to explore zero trust microsegmentation together. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Peter. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is Peter Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Edgewise Networks. Started my career as a practitioner and in infrastructure and cybersecurity, working with Harvard, Bank of America, Fidelity UK, Nike, so on and so forth. And really just set out to solve problems that I was having as a practitioner, namely how to control network communications in an ever-changing landscape of dynamic infrastructure with container orchestration, cloud deployments, auto-scaling, so on and so forth. And that really is the genesis of Edgewise.
Excellent. And when researching you, my understanding of Edgewise Networks is that you make an automatic microsegmentation solution that actually enables enterprises to create zero trust environments. And it's such a hot topic at the moment. But for people outside of this space, can you possibly expand on exactly what it means and the kind of problems that you solve?
Let's start with microsegmentation. Microsegmentation is really applying firewalls in a very granular manner. And really, a firewall derives its security value through very specific policies. And what we've seen up to this point is that you typically deploy a firewall at the perimeter of a data center or the perimeter of a PCI environment or the perimeter of an organization's external presence. And microsegmentation is really saying that you need to wrap a firewall around a smaller set of business applications to isolate business workloads and data from one another to stop the attacker from moving laterally between systems to gain access to sensitive data. Now, what exactly is zero trust as it pertains to microsegmentation? Well, zero trust is really taking it one step further and saying that no connection should be allowed, default block, unless they are required, least privilege access, and all access must be verified by something better than address, port, and protocol, which is identity. And that is the basis of our auto-segmentation solution. Our solution uses the cryptographic identity of the communicating software, user, container, and device verified on both sides of the connection to make sure that it's only the legitimate entities that are making the connection. And it does that so that you can enforce least privilege access based on identity, stop malicious attackers from moving laterally, introducing malware into environments, because every connection is validated by that fingerprint.
And it's like I said a few moments ago, zero trust and microsegmentation are incredible hot topics at the moment in that information security landscape. And I think much of that is because Gartner also listed microsegmentation as a top security priority. But can you expand on why you think it's such a big deal right now?
Yeah, it's really an interesting point about the Gartner Cloud Workload Protection Platform hierarchy. Their 2019 report actually listed microsegmentation and network visibility as the number one security practice that should be implemented outside of basic operational hygiene. And they consider operational hygiene to be things like don't check your email on your servers. Don't browse the web on your servers. Make sure you collect your logs, keep up to date on patches, and use a configuration management system to make sure configurations are consistent. That's basic operational hygiene. The next one in the list is microsegmentation and network visibility. And I think it really speaks to sort of the security value that this approach offers, and implementing least privilege access on the network layer really mitigates a number of threats that exist higher up in the stack. So why is this such a hot topic? Well, I think its foundation is rooted in common sense. Only allow access that is necessary when it's necessary by the entities that require that access and nothing more. This is something that we've all aspired to accomplish. It's just that up until this point, it really hasn't been feasible from a management perspective. And one of the core innovations of Edgewise is the ability to dramatically reduce the number of policies that need to be managed to accomplish a least privilege access model. And that's in large part due to sort of the maturity of machine learning and other analytical techniques, where up until this point, we didn't really have the ability to take billions of possible network pathways and crunch them down to a set of policies that would allow only required access and keep that up to date in real time. But the evolution of cloud computing, sort of auto-scaling workloads that can leverage massive amounts of computation, machine learning, Bayesian analysis, and other analytical techniques all coming together at the same time make this possible today and never before today.
And as a former IT guy, I know that historically attempts at microsegmentation have been incredibly long, complicated, and expensive. But for anybody or any business leaders that are listening, can you just expand on that and the problems that traditionally businesses have had to go through?
Yeah, there's a number of problems. Let's start at the most obvious problem, which is just the vast complexity of policy sets when you're defining policy to control every communication path between every device in your entire environment. So the basic numbers would be, let's say you've got 99 devices with 30 applications within them. The maximal Cartesian product would be approximately 980,000 pathways between all of those possible applications. So that's 99 devices, 10 each. That's 990 times 990, which is around 980,000 possible pathways between them. That is the maximum number of policies that you could have to manage access between them. But the required access will be somewhere between 0 and 980,000. So you can imagine the analytical complexity just to wrangle the data, understand what pathways are needed, what pathways need to be codified in policy. Yesterday, doing that in an Excel spreadsheet was virtually impossible. So today, there's still a challenge, but it's dramatically simpler than it was in years past.
So the question I've got to ask then is, what is Edgewise's unique approach to creating zero trust, and what makes it different from all those other solutions out there in that crowded space?
Yeah, so we've actually been awarded already 3 patents, and we've got 8 more pending. And really what this comes down to is we've fundamentally altered the way you should think about microsegmentation. Microsegmentation up to this point has been largely focused on using host-based firewalls orchestrated via management plane to come up with a set of policies to allow access. Well, what we realized is that, first of all, that's largely a waste of time. And the reason is because if you're using basic firewalling techniques, it's trivial for an attacker to move through a firewall, to piggyback over allowed access. So why take on the administrative complexity when the security value is actually quite small? So what we said is that you need to validate what is using a network connection. And we validate that using the cryptographic identity of the software on both sides of the connection. So for instance, let's say you had an application server that needed access to a database server. Using a traditional firewall, you would set up a policy that says the address of the application server is allowed to talk to the address and port of the database server. But implicitly, what you're saying is that any software running on the application server may talk to the database because the firewall has no concept of what the software was that was making the connection. And so the security value is limited there because as an attacker, if I gained access to your application server, I could use any software I wanted to interact and connect to the database. That's not really substantial security value. With Edgewise, instead what we do is we take the cryptographic finger of the application running on the application server, and we make sure that only that legitimate business application interacts with the database, thereby eliminating any other covert administrative tools, malicious software, malware, any other tool that an attacker might be in will not be allowed to interact with that database, only the legitimate software. So that's number one. Give a better security outcome through identity verification. But then the next part is even more powerful. If you think now about doing strong identity verification, what that means is that your policies don't need to be particularly specific. So if you had a list of application servers that interacted with that database, you simply define a policy of the list of app software that needs to talk to the database. That's one policy covering a multitude of systems and connections. And the point I'm getting at here is you could never justify doing that with a firewall because it would effectively allow way too much access to the database. But with identity, you can because you are verifying what that software was. So we can simplify the policy, meaning that you've got fewer policies to manage and increase the security by verifying the communicating software. You get the best of both worlds, better security with lower overall management cost.
And I also read that Edgewise Networks recently raised, I think it was $11 million in new financing. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that funding will actually help you continue your success as we head into 2020?
Yeah, absolutely. So the additional funding really is driving the go-to-market strategy. We spent approximately 3 years building this very unique software layer. As I said, 3 patents granted, 8 more pending. And this is a fundamentally different approach to microsegmentation, using strong software identification and verification to simplify policy management. And really what this comes down to is that we're a New England-based company in Boston. That New England spirit is do more with less. Based on our initial $5 million of funding, we've been able to build a truly differentiated product offering in the market. And now with this additional $11 million, we can take that same spirit of do more with less and go after the market broadly from a go-to-market strategy and build a big sustainable business here.
And of course, with any hot topic, there's going to be a lot of misinformation out there. So I'm curious, are there any myths, misconceptions in the world of microsegmentation and zero trust that you can finally lay rest today?
I think one of the main misunderstandings about microsegmentation is what is being protected when you use a firewall-based approach. The typical microsegmentation approach with firewalls uses a technique called ring fencing. And really all that means is that you allow open access within the perimeter of those microsegments, but you only control access to and from the microsegment. Well, what that means is once the attacker breaches that perimeter and gets on the inside, they can move freely within the microsegment. And that kind of is not the point of zero trust. The point of zero trust is to validate and affirm every single connection between every single entity that's interacting. And the firewall-based approach that we're seeing fairly commonly, you pointed out that it's a fairly crowded space. Everybody is using firewalls to accomplish their outcome. And what they're leaving out of their messaging is that the majority of the attack surface in the environment is not actually protected by this approach because the connections are not being validated. On the inside of the ring fence, it is a free-for-all with completely open access. You need an approach of strong identity verification to be able to control every access between every single system, every entity, every database, every business application throughout the entire infrastructure. And you need to be able to do that with a small, efficient policy set. And I'm not aware of a single vendor besides Edgewise that can accomplish that because we created the space of strong identity verification, have the patents to prove it. And, we're really driving this forward with the best of both worlds, high security, simple management.
Now, I appreciate you probably can't go into too many specifics here, but are there any use cases that you could possibly share with us that will just help anybody listening understand the difference that you're making with some of the biggest brand names in the world right now?
Yeah, I'm happy to go into details. I feel like our competitive differentiation is so strong that even sort of airing these out on a public podcast, our competitors simply wouldn't be able to recreate the outcome. Here's an example. Let's say, for instance, you're in AWS, Azure, or GCP. Each one of those three cloud vendors has something called instance metadata. Effectively, it's a big directory of attributes about the virtual machines, including security tokens. Plain text security tokens, non-encrypted, unauthenticated access. If you can gain access to the server, you have access to the tokens. And this is actually how the Capital One data breach happened. There was an SSRF, a server-side request forgery, which was taken advantage of by an attacker on the internet. And they sent in a forged request that said, hey, go to the metadata service and go request the security token and send it back to me. Well, they got the security token and then they accessed an S3 bucket, which had 106 million records of personally identifiable information. Great. So how do you protect instance metadata? Well, in the shared responsibility model with AWS, the responsibility to protect metadata is actually the user's responsibility. There is no facility inside AWS, Azure, or GCP to protect that service. Security groups don't work. Firewalls don't work. There's nothing that works in that space. Well, enter Edgewise. Using an identity-based approach, our system automatically builds a set of policies to identify the software that requires access to metadata services, allows only that specific software to interact with it, and denies all other services from interacting with metadata services, thereby preventing access to the security tokens and other sensitive information. That's one example. Another very crisp example that, again, our competitors simply cannot accomplish because they lack strong software identity verification is anti-malware. Virtually every customer in cybersecurity, because there's so many solutions touching on so many problem spaces, they always ask, what can I replace? And the simple answer is, when you look at that CWPP hierarchy that you referenced earlier on the call, the thing that is at the very top of the pyramid, meaning the least important, is anti-malware and antivirus software on servers. Okay, so can you just get rid of it? Nah, I don't think you can justify just throwing it out the window unless you have a compensating control. Edgewise is that compensating control. Virtually every piece of malware requires some amount of network connectivity to accomplish its either initial compromise or its exfiltration of data. And what we've done, and we're selling this actively into large banks, is we take a litany of malware, common malware like Hidden Wasp, which is a super aggressive and subversive Linux-based malware. And we enable our protection and just start unloading all of this malware into the systems. And every single time they try to interact with the outside world for command and control, for downloading additional modules, so on and so forth, we catch it and we stop it. Because part of the zero trust model is, unlike malware, we are not trying to identify what is bad. We identify what is good, thereby stopping everything else that is bad without any signatures being established. This is an incredibly effective mechanism to prevent the the propagation of malware within a server environment by only allowing the trusted, legitimate business applications to interact and therefore stopping everything else from occurring. Well, how would that work if you were using a host-based firewall where you're just saying, yeah, addresses, ports, and protocols can communicate? There's no software validation to say this is good or this is unknown and therefore blocked. That is something special to Edgewise, and it solves this very big space, especially on the Linux side, where there isn't a lot of anti-malware or antivirus capabilities on Linux, and we fill that void and displace anti-malware vendors in the Windows server space.
So as we begin to look into the future and life in 2020 and beyond, what's next for Edgewise? Is there anything else you can share or any teasers you can leave us with today?
Oh, man, there is just so much going on here and so much potential in this space. What I would say, there's not a lot I can share just because I don't want to share too much of our roadmap. But what I can say is that right now, compared to a traditional firewall-based approach using host-based firewalls or physical firewalls in the network infrastructure, our policy management is approximately an order of magnitude smaller than the equivalent firewall-based firewall policy set. Within the next month, we will be rolling out another policy mechanism that will reduce that policy set and ongoing operational burden by an additional order of magnitude. We're talking about if you had 1,000 firewall policies, right now you would have to manage 100 Edgewise policies in approximately a month. That would be 10. So literally 2 orders of magnitude reduction in policy management. And the only way that is possible is through strong identity verification. There's a lot more. I'd love to come back on, and once we get a little bit closer to releasing those capabilities, share all about it.
Wow, that's some information to leave us with there. That's a teaser and a half. We will definitely get you back on next year. But for people listening that would love to find out more about you, keep up to speed with those developments that you just hinted on there, can you just point them in the direction of your website and the best way of contacting your team if they've got any questions?
Yeah, to go straight to our website, you can go to edgewise.net. Or you can go zerotrust.net. It'll take you to the same place and give you a nice, tidy explanation of what Zero Trust networking is all about. And yeah, feel free to sign up for a demo and mention that you saw us on the podcast, and we will connect you with a go-to-market team to start a demo and give you a nice, healthy discount.
Fantastic. Well, like we said at the very beginning of the podcast, Gartner recently listed microsegmentation as a top security priority, second only, I believe, to better network hygiene. And it is an incredibly complex subject, and traditional methods are no longer relevant in many cases. But with Edgewise, you not only have a unique solution on your hands, but you're also able to communicate it in a language that everybody can understand, which in itself is priceless across the tech landscape. So a big thank you for taking the time to come and share that with us today. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
Historically, I think attempts at microsegmentation have been long, complicated, and expensive, and often taking over a year to complete. And the thing is, once it's done, it's never finished, because applications and data stores are constantly getting moved around, which of course leads to vulnerability until policy is updated again. And the dynamic nature of the cloud, where things change daily, and the current approach of repurposing firewalls is just not adequate or efficient anymore. So for those reasons, I love how Edgewise is bringing this unique approach to creating zero trust by first using machine learning to map the network and eliminate non-critical pathways. And by doing that, it reduces the attack surface too. And then, what I especially love is a single click. It has the ability to micro-segment the network. And Edgewise's innovation then ties policies to the applications themselves versus that underlying IP address. But what did you take away from today's conversation about zero trust and indeed micro-segmentation? And do you think that the methods of microsegmentation are outdated and cannot support the dynamic nature of clouds and containers here in 2019 and beyond? As always, I've told you what I've taken away from today's conversation. You've heard today's guest, But now I'll put the microphone over to you. Please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, or tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. And I have had a few emails about another topic recently, and as many of you know, I do help my clients structure and launch their own podcasts with my Podcasting Made Simple production and launch program. In a nutshell, they go away and record a conversation, and I edit, produce and publish the episodes for them. However, I have had several emails this month about people asking who I would recommend for a podcast host. So for people that are comfortable with doing this without any help at all or handholding, I've secured a promo code from Libsyn, which is where I host this podcast as well. And yes, there aren't many free hosting platforms out there, and I often get emails saying, well, what about SoundCloud or what about Anchor? But the downside is that you have very little control and are playing by somebody else's rules that can be changed at any moment. Whereas when I first launched this podcast, I think if you've got a long-term vision for your podcast like I originally had, you want to be in control of your own episode length, number of episodes, and decide whether ads are appended to the episodes or not. And for me, that's why Libsyn was the sensible option. And they do make it incredibly easy just to hit one button and publish to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, YouTube, all the usual suspects. So if you are thinking of using Libsyn as your podcast host, simply use TBW when signing up. There should be a little promo box there. I don't know about you, but whenever I see a promo box, I always have to search for it straight away. Well, to save you the hassle of that, just put TBW, which is me, Tech Blog Writer, and that code will give you the rest of the current month and the entire next month for free. But, of course, just like the Gremlins movie, and we are approaching Christmas, so it's never been more relevant than ever, there are 3 simple rules to ensure you get the most out of that code. Because, 1, that promo code only works for your first show, so if you've got several shows, it's not going to work for a second. And 2, to get the maximum value out of the offer, add the code on the 2nd of the month, because that will ensure you get the entire month and the following month free too. And it's much safer than doing it on the 1st of the month, because there's that many time zones. Here in the UK, for example, we're 8 hours in front of the west coast of the US. So to avoid any confusion there, do it on the 2nd of the month. And the only other thing I would say is choose your data package wisely, because if you change that account level at any point during your free trial, it will instantly kick the account back into payment mode. And so don't fall into the trap of signing up for a $5 account and thinking, oh, actually, I need a $15 or a $20 account, because it'll just end up costing you more in the long run. So that code will give you all of this month and the following month for free. It's TBW. And in complete transparency, if you do sign up, I get a small commission too, which will help me keep running this daily tech podcast on, you guessed it, Libsyn. And we've gone full circle. But if you do launch your own podcast, please let me know again. Email me, tweet me, contact me on LinkedIn. I'll subscribe and gladly review your podcast too. So, sorry to ramble on there, but there was Steve in Basingstoke, Emilio in Los Angeles, and Fraser Baines, who doesn't tell me where he's from, but there was 3 emails that come over the last couple of days. I have replied to your email, but I think if I'm getting the same email several times, I'll often just give everybody a mention on the podcast too and a little shout out. So guys, let me know how that podcast goes if you do launch it. As for everyone else, a huge thank you for tuning into this podcast every single day. I know it's a big ask and I genuinely appreciate it. So thanks for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.